Hi, I'm Rick, Chief Experience Officer at YOONO. Today I'm joined by James, our Chief Legal Officer. And today we're going to be talking about the Data Act and what companies need to do in 2025 to prepare. Welcome, James. Good to be back.
Good to be here.
Good to have you back, sir. So it's great to have you back, and we thought it'd be great to talk a bit more about some of the newer legislation, and it'd be great to talk in a little bit more detail about the Data Act, and especially from a use and access perspective. So, if you could start by just giving us a bit of an overview, it'd be great to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, of course. So the Data Use and Access Act, a bit of a mouthful, but maybe just call it the Data Act. So that passed, so the UK government passed that in June. And it does a variety of things, but sort of the overarching theme is to change existing rules and laws around how data is used in society. And part of that is the rules around data protection. So what companies can and can't do with personal data. And there's a particular part of the data protection law framework that the new Data Act changes that I think we're going to want to concentrate on today, because it's particularly relevant to how businesses use AI in particular in a hiring context. And those are the rules around automated decision making.
Nice. It'd be great for us to just start by, I guess, giving a bit of context on automated decision making. Like, what does that actually mean in kind of layman's terms, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. So the automated decision making framework already exists under UK law in the UK GDPR, so the main data protection law in the UK. And what the rules currently say is that a business can only take an automated decision about someone. So that's a significant decision, like, for example, a decision about whether to hire someone, offer them a job. You can only take that decision using automated means. So basically outsourcing the decision to a computer, to a piece of AI, under certain limited circumstances where what's called a relevant legal basis applies. So in other words, it really constrains the circumstances in which businesses can rely on automation in order to take significant decisions about someone. Now, obviously, we're focusing today on hiring decisions as an example of a significant decision, but there are lots of other significant decisions that might be relevant. So, offering someone credit, for example, is another decision that's often automated. But in a hiring context, if you rely on a computer program to make the decision or to play a significant role in making the decision about who to hire, then you are carrying out automated decision making, and that is quite strictly regulated under UK GDPR. Now, what the Data Act does, so what the new law that came into force in June does, is that it basically loosens some of those restrictions, and it removes this requirement to establish a relevant legal basis before you're allowed to do automated decision making. So what that means in simple terms is that the circumstances in which a business can carry out automated decision making are now more or less unlimited.
Yeah.
So you can use it in any context without having to fit through one of these relevant legal bases. Now, it doesn't mean it's a complete free-for-all. And I think, it's quite important that the law still preserves all of the other existing safeguards that we already had under GDPR. And those safeguards are things like, if someone has an automated decision taken about them, they have the right to contest that decision. They have the right to request human intervention. So, to ask for a human being to actually review the automated decision, validate that it was fair, validate that all of the relevant information was taken into account.
So real process changes that businesses actually might need to implement as part of this.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, all of this is sort of reflective of the increasing use of automation and AI by businesses. So the government is saying, in effect, look, we recognize that businesses are going to want to use more and more automation, that AI is going to become more prevalent in businesses. Therefore, we're not going to try and artificially stand in the way of that. So we're going to, release some of these restrictions and say it's fine. Go ahead, do automated decision making, more or less wherever you want, but you still have to give people these rights so that the individual that's had an automated decision taken about them, if they think that decision might have been unfair for whatever reason, they can contest it. They can ask for that human intervention. So, it's arguably quite a good sort of balancing of those competing factors. On the one hand, allowing businesses to reap the benefits of automation and AI, but at the same time giving people rights if those automated decisions are unfair for whatever reason.
Yeah. So businesses making sure that they've got the processes in place becomes super essential. Do you think it shifts, or it gives a signal of a shift from the government's perspective when it comes to AI allowance and making, I guess, AI generally a part of more everyday business?
Yeah, I think it's exactly that, because I think, the way the law was previously, it was in effect saying you can only use AI to take decisions about people in these limited circumstances. And I think there's a bit of recognition that is no longer realistic, because actually the way AI is being adopted by businesses now, it's impacting all parts of the business, all existing processes, and so therefore the number of use cases where a business might want to deploy AI and automation is much broader than it used to be. So therefore, if we have this rule that's sort of artificially constricting businesses and saying, you can only do automated decision making in these limited circumstances, that doesn't really work anymore.
Sure.
So we got rid of that. You can do it in more or less wherever you want, but people still have these really important rights so that they're not getting, trampled over, and so there's not, sort of irresponsible and unfair use of AI. Yeah,
because I guess there's the business's perspective, but then there's also the individuals themselves who could be implicated by the process. Do you think there's enough being done to give awareness on both sides, both from a business perspective and an individual point of view, so people know that they have these rights as well, I guess?
Yeah, it's a great question. And look, I'm sure the vast majority of people, if you walked up to someone on the street, they don't know what automated decision making is. They don't know that they have these rights. So, and there are legal obligations on companies around transparency. So, companies are supposed to tell people when they are carrying out automated decision making, and they're supposed to tell people what rights they have. Now, often that information is buried, in a privacy policy that people don't typically look at. So I think, it's a really good point, and I think there probably is some onus on, whether it's the government, whether it's the ICO as the relevant regulator, to maybe do a bit of an information campaign to sort of raise people's awareness of their rights. But I think also naturally, as there is more and more automated decision making in society, and more people are impacted by these decisions, people will begin to understand more about the rights they have. And we see it in other contexts, and people share information online on forums, etc. So I'm sure that awareness will rise over time. But equally, if you're a responsible business, you need to be aware of the legal obligations you have around transparency, and you should never be trying to conceal the fact that you are taking a decision about someone using a computer rather than a human being doing it.
Yeah. Does anything change from a GDPR perspective, like when it comes to the businesses and how they're acting as data controllers with this?
Yeah, no, I mean, short answer is no, really. So as I say, there's this slight change to the rules around automated decision making, widening the circumstances in which you can do it. But at the same time, all of the existing rules under the UK GDPR continue to apply. So, you still have an obligation to ensure that the data that you collect about someone is accurate, it's proportionate, it's representative. And all of that is really important, because ultimately, the more care you take as a business around ensuring the data that you collect on someone is fair, accurate, etc., the more accurate the decision by the AI program is going to be, because it's the old sort of rule of computer science, garbage in, garbage out. The decision that's taken by the computer will only be as reliable and as accurate as the quality of the data that we give to it. So businesses absolutely need to remember all of their existing GDPR obligations, and also just sort of basic hygiene around data collection and use, to ensure that the input they're giving to the AI that's going to be making the decision is that data is as high quality as possible.
So do you think these law changes are just the start of the conversation, or do you think it'll be ongoing in terms of how we'll continue to build and how these laws will elaborate as we start to understand more as we use AI in a business context?
Yeah, I think absolutely we're just at the start of the journey here. So, we are still in the very early days of, widespread adoption of AI by businesses. And I think, frankly, the government at the moment is still a little bit undecided on what its long-term plans are going to be in terms of, further regulation of AI. This is, potentially just a drop in the ocean. What we see in other contexts, so, the European Union has gone down one particular road. They're bringing in this thing called the AI Act, which is a very big piece of legislation regulating all sorts of uses of AI, including, interestingly, in the context of recruitment. So, if you're using AI in recruitment in the European Union, or in fact, even if you're a UK business, but you have offices in the EU and you have employees in the EU, then you're going to be caught by the AI Act, and you're going to be subject to quite strict regulation around any use of AI in a recruitment context. Now, the UK has currently indicated it doesn't want to go down the same path. It doesn't want to have an AI Act in the UK, and instead, we're relying a lot more on existing laws like GDPR, like the automated decision-making rules. But, who knows? It's entirely possible that over time, the government will decide that more legislation is necessary as they see the impact of this play out in practice. And I think, an important thing to remember is that the Labour government, has indicated in the past, in consultations with trade unions and workers' representatives, that potentially the use of AI in employment, including in hiring, is one area where they do perceive a particular risk and where they might need to take more action. So I think that is conceivable. And I think the practical advice for businesses is, look, there's only so much you can do to prepare for the unknown in terms of legislation. But I think what seems obvious to me is that there are an existing set of good practice principles around how you use AI responsibly and fairly that are always going to be relevant, whatever the laws are in the jurisdictions in which you operate. And so those sort of core principles of AI fairness, safe use of AI, those should always be your North Star, if you like, when you're adopting these things in practice.
Love that. Nice. Do you think from a company perspective, what would you say if you was to go like, right, okay, 1, 2, 3, these are the things with this new act that it's almost a no-brainer that you need to have in place, like from a process point of view? What would you say those top 3 things would be?
So I think the first would be understand where you are using or where you plan to be using AI to make significant decisions about people. And that's not always that obvious, because often businesses are using AI, a stage of a decision-making process, but the AI might not actually be making the decision. So, if you look at a typical recruitment process, say you're using AI to do some initial screening of CVs, to sort of supplement information you're getting about candidates. Well, that sort of use of AI may not actually constitute automated decision-making, because the final decision about, which candidate you hire, which candidates you reject is taken further down the line by by a human being within the team. So first of all, it's work out like, how are we using AI, and are we actually using AI to take automated decisions such as hiring someone or rejecting someone from a hiring process. I think the second would be the point we sort of touched on earlier about the importance of data hygiene and data quality. So, if you're going to start using automation, then it becomes even more important than it already is that you check that the data you collect about candidates is accurate. You're really selective about the data sources that you use, that you're only relying on trustworthy data sources that are up to date, that you sort of take care around collecting data in a responsible way. And then I think the third piece of recommendation would be selective about the third-party suppliers that you work with in this context. So the vast majority of businesses aren't going to be building their own automation tools. They're not going to be building their own AI to help them in recruitment. They're going to be looking to third-party providers. And I think in that context, you want to be a picky consumer, right? You want to be asking lots of questions as a supplier about how did they train and build the AI model that sits behind their product? What testing did they do? Was it designed for your specific use case? What assurances can they provide that the system has been tested and validated as being accurate, as being free from bias? What data sources does the product rely on? Are those good quality, reliable data sources? What protections will the supplier give you in the contract? There's a long list of things, and it really does pay to be selective, because I think one thing that we're seeing at the moment, and I'm sure you see this a lot more than I do, is that the market is sort of flooded with providers.
And the last point as well, like when you're talking about all these details, these are real things that we see from potential customers and people who are working in, say, larger businesses and HR teams and things like that, that a lot of them almost are even scared to touch it, because there are so many implications that come with making sure that they've checked the box on bias, making sure they've checked the box on this, that it almost can be seen as something that they need to hold back from a little bit, because without having the full context or the misconceptions around it, it can be scary to some extent for businesses and individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think as a customer, though, like, just you don't need to be a technical expert in the product that you're buying and how it works. Really, just by asking a few basic questions, just by looking for that assurance, quite quickly, I think it will become apparent, which of these suppliers, actually have, something reputable standing behind them, and are able to give, proper responses to those questions, and which, it all just sort of falls apart, and it becomes obvious that this is, snake oil. So and I think, because ultimately, from a legal perspective, you as the customer, you are the data controller. You're the one who is making the ultimate decision about, which candidate to hire. Most of the legal responsibility, liability, reputational risk sits with you. And so, you can't just palm all of that off onto the supplier. And so, you're the one in the hot seat. Therefore, you can and you need to be demanding with your suppliers, and selective in who you work with.
Nice. Is there anything that you see where businesses have a real misunderstanding around some of this stuff? Like, are there interpretations of the rulings and the updated legislation where even just some of the conversations that you've been having with people, where people aren't necessarily understanding it correctly or jumping to conclusions, or maybe already trying to get ahead of it, but maybe making bad decisions where it's setting themselves up a little bit for failure?
Yeah, so I think, I sort of see companies fall down on either side of this. So on the one hand, I definitely see lots of companies who, in my view, are sort of too conservative and too nervous almost, and have this misunderstanding, which is to some extent understandable. But in my view, it is a misunderstanding that they can't use AI in recruitment.
It's just
context,
a blanket no-go.
It's a blanket no, and it's just there's too much risk, and it's just not. There's no way it could be GDPR compliant and all the rest of it. I enjoy sort of educating people on why that is a misunderstanding. And
this is why you're wrong.
Yeah, no, but in a good way, because ultimately most of those companies would like to use those tools if they could, and there's a commercial driver to do it. And I think what I'm able to explain to them is like you can do it in a compliant way. There's no rule that says you can't do it outright. There are just things like the things we've been talking about today that you need to think about, and to make sure you're doing it in the right way. So that's one thing. And then on the other hand, you definitely do get other companies that just aren't aware of these rules at all and just sort of ride roughshod over everything, and think that actually just automating as much as possible, as fast as possible, is the way to do things. And often that misconception is driven. It might be a cost driver in that sort of they're seeing the savings and the cost efficiencies that come with automation. But it's often also actually because of, again, another misconception that the AI is always going to be a more reliable and a more accurate way of making the decision. And sometimes that's the case, but it's often more nuanced than that. And there will always be things where the AI misses things, misses subtleties, misses nuances that we as human beings with our experience would be able to spot. Or maybe also because of the problem we spoke about earlier in terms of the data that we're giving to the AI to make that decision is not complete, is not accurate. So this is why the perfect answer has to be responsible use of AI and AI coupled with human oversight.
And acceptance that it's not going to solve everything for you.
Yes, exactly. And it's all about balance.
Nice, love it. From a legal and compliance perspective, what are the top 3 things that recruiters or recruitment specifically should be considering?
So I think number 1 is data hygiene. So the AI tool is only going to be as good as the data you give it. Good quality, accurate, complete data. Number 2 is remember your existing compliance obligations as a data controller under GDPR. Those remain relevant when you're using AI tools in recruitment. And number 3, be really selective with the suppliers that you work with. So only use providers of AI tools who can give you assurances that the AI was developed responsibly and safely.
Is there anything that on the topic that you want to leave as almost a bit of a final thought?
I don't know. I think I've probably spoken quite enough. But I mean, I think, again, just to re-emphasize that final point, right, that I think what businesses should be trying to do here is to strike the right balance. Don't be scared of AI. Don't be the company that gets left behind.
Exactly.
But equally implement it in the right way and keep human beings in the room and in the loop.
Love that. Appreciate it. Great chat as always, James. Thanks so much.
Good
Appreciate it. Cheers, buddy.